Telepathy and Thought-Transference by Professor S.A. Weltmer, dedicated to those who now live and those who shall live hereafter, who are seeking truth for the sake of truth. Preface. The writer, some 6 years ago, adopted the plan, both in speaking and writing, of giving nothing to the world except deductions from his own individual experience. The first 2 years of the 6 mentioned were given almost exclusively to the subject of physical healing. The transference of thought from the mind of the healer to the mind of the patient became a subject of very great interest. Surprising results were frequently secured in cases where the conscious thought of the healer, as well as the conscious thought of the patient, was not identical with the results produced by the ministration. Hence, we reached the conclusion that there was an undefined addition to the suggestion which was transferred by words, either spoken or written, or conveyed through some manipulation, or some induced attitude of the patient on his own initiative. That back of all these manifestations there is an intelligent and powerful relation established, by means of which communication was had between the unconscious minds of both healer and patient. This interchange was carried on between the unconscious minds of the persons involved by a law known only to the unconscious part of themselves. This interchange between the deeper selves is what we call telepathy. Hundreds of cases became a matter of record wherein the message sent and the message received were manifested in the physical condition of some and in the mental condition of others of our patients. These facts demonstrated that man has access to a deeper wisdom than anything of which he is conscious, and that these messages, which were so easily conveyed, could be, by proper study and careful investigation, interpreted. In the 3rd year of our application of this principle, we found this thought was not confined alone to, and these messages were not entirely passing between minds with the purpose of physical healing, but they applied with equal force to all things of human interest. We concluded that this unconscious interchange of thought was the secret of suggestion, the secret of hypnotism, the secret of mental healing, the secret of Christianity, the secret of invention, the secret of exploration, and the fact of human progress in every department of life. It manifested itself in character in the form of self-reliance, in the physical being, in the condition of health, in religion, in the attitude of trust, and furnished a key to the understanding of the intimate relation existing between the human and the divine. In fact, it is the expression of the divine through the human. We found it was the secret of the success of extemporaneous speaker, the secret of success in all human achievement. In the commercial world, it was the philosopher's stone which turns everything it touches to gold. On this subject, a book was begun some 2 years ago, but on account of the newness of the theme, the rapidly enlarging field for investigation, and the intense interest expressed by the thinking world in this topic, the writer found it almost impossible to halt at any point in his investigation to give his deductions. For each day brought forth new evidences, not only of the existence of this power of thought interchange, but of its utilitarian quality. Whatever may be said in this work will be stated with the understanding that ere long continued investigation will probably change some of our postulates, giving us new definitions and entering new fields of endeavor, so that this work cannot be offered as the complete discussion of the subject, but only as a preliminary to that which must follow. The world is moving so rapidly, man is getting a better grasp of this most obscure phase of mental action in mental interchange. The intention of the author is not to suggest his own great knowledge of mental phenomena, but to furnish a work which will inspire the reader to individual effort in the direction of acquiring mastery of the subject, and to enable him to not only comprehend, but apply to himself the principles herein presented. For nothing is presented here that has not been tried and proven again and again in the actual experience of the writer, that this work may have the careful attention of every reader, and that each reader may be as gratefully benefited and instructed in the perusal of these pages as has the writer in arriving at the truths contained therein, is his most ardent hope. Introduction. Telepathy is the latest phase of mental phenomena to attract the attention of the scientific world. So late that the most recent lexicographers give it indifferent mention, and the last issue of encyclopedias classifies phenomena as the effect of one mind upon another without communication through the ordinary channels of sensation. Telepathy means more than this. It has more far-reaching significance. These definitions are limited in their scope to the various phases of mental interchange between individuals. My conception of telepathy is based upon the hypothesis sustained by external and internal evidence, of a thought atmosphere. Atmosphere as clearly defined, as absolute in its elements, as potent in manifestation, as the physical atmosphere, and indeed of which the physical atmosphere is but a secondary segment. This mental atmosphere is the realm of the infinite, the everywhere of God's presence, and he who abides in this realm abides in God. This is what Christ meant when he said, "If ye abide me, and my words abide in you, ye shall ask what ye will, and it shall be done unto you." He who abides here hears the message of omnipotence, and it is interpreted to his inner conscience. Under that transcription, all things become possible. It is here man first learns his own omnipotence, first discovers the untrodden field of his own possibilities. It is here he gathers the courage to enter the gateway of the unexplored. For inscribed upon its portals, in characters untouched by any passing shadow, are the Master's words, "Lo, I am with you always." Here again, the soul that listens is awakened to the potentiality of Christ's words. Blessed are the ears that hear. Here, amid the eternal vibrations of undying thought, God's thought, he learns the infinitude of that thought, its majesty, its sweetness, its adaptability to all human need. It is here the soul comprehends God's purpose when he called the earth out of chaos and said to the sea, "Hitherto shalt thou come, but no further." He learns by what way the light is parted when God said to the unutterable darkness, "Let there be light," and there was light. He understands who hath begotten the drops of dew, who hath commissioned the lightnings, bound the sweet influences of the Pleiades, or loosed the bands of Orion, who provided the raven his food and gave to man dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing, even to the fullness of dominion over himself. It is in this mighty realm of the great unknown that man also learned he is himself a segment of divinity, that he is born of God, that he is a part of the great world movement, and moreover, that world movement was for the evolution of man, man in his entirety, man in his divinity. He learns that man's mortality is always immortality, that his tabernacle in the flesh is the house not made with hands, that fair mansion which God has provided for the soul while it tarries upon earth, while it holds dominion over the fish of the sea and the fowl of the air, thereby to execute the infinite commission. He learns, moreover, that he is a part of God, and that God can no more separate soul from himself than he can separate himself from himself. That God's purpose and man's purpose are identical, that God's interests and man's interests are at one, that it is only when man swings to a tangent that he finds himself in the centrifugal horizon. But even there is a centripetal force, like the attraction of gravity in the physical world, which still holds him to the center. Again, he perceives that centrifugal horizon is swept by the omniscient vision, and there is no place where God is not. Hence, no place where he is not with God. Born of this consciousness is man's recognition of his relation to the ultimates of the infinite thought, and he finds that thought transfused into his own consciousness. Here man learns, moreover, that not only he is here, but all men are here. Therefore he is in touch with the race, in touch with the universe of mind. That thought is one, that thought vibration is eternal, that every thought of truth in all the ages is a composite element of the atmosphere in which he dwells, that these vibrations are intelligible. They are audible to the receptive ear, that not only the infinite thought is accessible to man, but the thought of all men is accessible to man. Here he discovers that mind is universal, and in mind he finds unity with God. Here man further learns that every element of progress in the human race is a component element in this mental atmosphere. He discovers the accelerated momentum of thought, its accumulated potentiality. Hence, he sees the forces which are his are the forces of the universe of thought, the accretion of the ages. The winds become his interpreter. The birds of the air bring him the keynote in the great harmony of that realm where no discord lingers, for God's breath is over all. Here he learns that the deep monotone of the sea is the undertone of God's message to his children who stand upon the shores of all lands, and that God has made of all people of the earth one language, the language of infinite purpose. It is in this realm the artist perceives the heavenward side of the rainbow and dips his brush in the unrevealed colors, in the shadow as in the sunbeam, in the spray of the ocean as in the mist of the land. It is here the inventor finds the vision of that unrevealed structure which he shall presently interpret to man. It is here the man of science discovers the science of God's law. He finds that God's laws run parallel, they never collide. He learns the infraction of any law in the realm of the physical or the realm of the spiritual is a divergence from God. That it is only by the ruthlessness of his own hands that any law can suffer infraction, that only by the infraction of law can discord creep into the soul's harmony, and that he alone is responsible for that discord. The science of telepathy is the science of the soul's interchange with God, of the interchange of the thought of one's soul with another. It is the science of listening, of thus gathering the forces essential to man's ultimate need and bearing them away into the realm of the material, where the physical universe gives him the materials for the imposing structure of his thought. It has been by this law of telepathy, through the day of every rising and setting sun since light was, that man's supreme effort has been made possible. When God commanded Adam to name the beasts of the field and the fowls of the air, from what vocabulary of language did he gather his catalogue? When Moses stood upon Mount Sinai and was told to go deliver his people from bondage, what voice gave the commission? Who revealed to him the perils of the desert land, the perils by the sea and the mountain fastnesses, and lent to his soul the prophecy of deliverance? Who gave to the eyes of the wanderer whose feet had traversed the last sands of life's desert, the heights of Nebo and the vision of the promised land? Surely it was not through physical media that he saw the land flowing with milk and honey, or numbered the generations who should inherit the land of their ancestors. Who took from the shoulders of this evangel of liberty the worn garments of his journeyings? What voice sang the requiem of the world's loss when his utterances failed upon the earth? Telepathy reveals to us that realm of consciousness where all God's purpose was interpreted to the soul of him who listened, and whose mission ended when God's purpose was fulfilled. It further reveals to us that the utterance of Sinai, when spoken upon its heights, floating out into the great sea of universal thought, have become interpreted to man. We turn our thought to the holy city. We lift our eyes to the star of the brooding skies, which is nestled about the rugged city on the heights where the wise men fell down and worshipped. We still hear in the ambient air that voice of the angel and the multitude of the heavenly host who sang glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill toward men. Telepathy teaches us that the song of the angels was not sung alone in Bethlehem, that its vibration was felt upon the heights and in the depths, by the highways and in the valleys of human struggle, in all lands and among all peoples, as a message of glad tidings. The gladness of that message lies in the fact that its vibration can never die away in the atmosphere of thought, that out of that single message has come the sweetness and power of every realized hope of the human heart. We stand upon the summit of Calvary, and we catch the infinite tenderness of the words which fell from the lips tremulous with death. Father, forgive them. Through the centuries, that appeal has floated in the atmosphere of thought, has broken in upon the ears of men in all generations with a potency in ratio with man's receptivity. It has expression in the philanthropies of the world in degree and of type commensurate not only with the measure of receptivity, but with the further power to transcribe it to the race, to infuse it into the thought of the era of each specific philanthropy. Telepathy is, moreover, that voice of inspiration which constitutes the mystery of the sacred book. A mystery which has been gradually unfolding, first in Orientalism, in occult thought, in the vagaries of primitive thinkers, in the grosser forms of worship through the formative periods of the world's history, but continually evolving into higher forms, until under Greek and Roman systems, it was the voice of the oracle. In the ceremonials of the Latin Church, it was the voice of authority, the mediator between God and man. In the Protestant world, the mystical misinterpretation of prophecy. Yet under all these systems, it has been the same voice. The obtuseness of man, the obtuseness of the race, has hindered the simple analysis which telepathy unfolds. In the later centuries, and distinctively in our own, the mental interchange between the divine and the human, between man and man, has been in ratio with the accumulated momentum of the vibration and the increasing receptivity of the race. In the beginnings, man only listened through a single avenue of the soul. Gradually, other avenues have been opened, and today, the soul itself, to the man who dwells in the atmosphere of power, is as one vast corridor in the palace of the infinite, where the Lord walks in the cool of the day and becomes his own interpreter. However, the interpretation is still fragmentary. A single fragment is found in Christian Science, another in mental science, another in faith curism. Modern theosophy still holds a raveling remnant of truth. But all these, gathered into one, are but as the fringes of the seamless robe of truth. The day is not far away when, as by a sudden vision of the night, in the dull day of our civilization, this full garment of power will become visible to all men, and that vision will appear with heightened colors and under a flashlight, which the religious thought of the world has not been able to project. Science, the long discarded, unrecognized, well-nigh repudiated handmaid of religion, is the later voice of inspiration. Science has no dealings with the antipathies, the idiosyncrasies, the prejudices, the unbeliefs of men. Science searches alone for truth. She is neither afraid of the beaten paths, the unexplored fastnesses, nor the miasmatic jungles. She scales all heights. She penetrates all depths. The fragment of rock in the buried strata speaks to her in a tone more audible than the voice of prophecy. The electric flash in the darkened clouds is to her the voice of the infinite, the voice of a subtle personality crying unto men, "Use me." The mighty ocean, which for ages has separated continents and divided peoples and hindered the unity of the races, speaks to the scientist of this century and bids him make a path upon the bosom of this mighty waters, bids him undergird the sea with cable and link the thought of continents with the invisible wires of vibration. This is the voice of omnipotence interpreted in the silent realm of telepathic interchange, comprehended, illustrated in every hall of industry of the universe, magnified in commercialism, in cooperative enterprise, in that amalgamation of effort which finds expression in every railroad tie whose mission it is to assist in the unification of a race, manifest in every ounce of coal which the grimy miner, unconscious perchance of his high mission to the world, exhumes from its long sepulchre, until at last the silver and the gold of the buried centuries, by the hand of the unconscious toiler, has become the specific media of a world unity. And so the silver and the gold of the infinite thought in the unbroken centuries, with accumulated momentum of vibration, has swept in upon the ears of men, ears gradually attuned to receptivity, until the thought of man has become as one with the thought of God. Man has become the interpreter of that thought in the domain of science in this higher, grander hour of the world's great movement, as in its primitive days, through the darkened channel of man's spiritual perception. The voice of telepathy is the voice of the century, the interpreter of the unknown of all ages into the known of this high noon of the world's civilization. End of introduction. Chapter 1. Telepathy and Thought-Transference. Schoolroom. On a given day, some 15 years ago, I went to the desk of a little boy in my schoolroom to give him his first lesson in penmanship. I gave him pen and paper and indicated the letter I desired him to copy. He hesitated. I assured him he could reproduce it and endeavored to stimulate in the child self-confidence. I left him for a little time, and on returning to him, saw that the transcript he had made was so nearly like the original it could not be mistaken for another letter. My thought concerning his power to execute had transferred itself to his mind, possessed him, and under its impulse he had transferred to paper the expression of my thought. This is thought transference. In the faraway ages of the world's youth, before the art of the sculptor had expressed itself in marble, a man of genius stood thoughtfully beside a block of unhewn marble fresh from the quarries. As he stood there, gazing, meditating upon its purpose, from some undefined source, a whisper entered his soul. The whisper of man asleep in the silent marble, and he would that he might awaken him from his slumber. He knew not the way. Still he listened, grew old, and died. His son stood there. The sleep of the slumber within his couch of marble was still unbroken. The son, too, listened to the voice of the invisible messenger. It meant something to him, yet he could not interpret it, and he too died. Generations came and went. In each some listener caught the minor tone of the vibration, but to none was its fullness interpreted. After the years, here and there, some man, more courageous than his fellows, gathered up his chisel and began to cut away the rough angles of the unhewn stone, if perchance he might catch a glimpse of the hidden treasure. Still to him the sculptor image was impossible, yet the voice of prophecy began to be audible to the ears of many. Michelangelo was the first to interpret that prophecy, standing one day in his studio, chisel in hand, approaching nearer and nearer to the form of the slumberer. A friend entered the studio. Seeing only the material side of the movement, the friend said to Angelo, "How is it possible for you to stand here day by day, hour by hour, beside this inanimate marble and wield that heavy chisel?" Michelangelo replied, "I see an angel in that block of marble, and I would give it wings." This was the message heard years and years before, lingering ever in the silent atmosphere, awaiting an interpreter. And, too, it was long after the spirit of the message was interpreted to the soul of man, before language adequate to its expression could be constructed. The manner of receiving that message is telepathy. Thought transference is that term which we use to designate man's ability to convey a thought or an idea from his own to another's mind in such manner and with such clearness that the recipient may comprehend it, construct it into form, and again express it. Telepathy means more than this. It has deeper significance. Telepathy is that subtle process by which man gathers material from the atmosphere of thought and gives to it expression. I desire to make clear the distinction between thought transference and telepathy. They are kindred, but not identical. That individual man through the ages has been receiving messages which no other soul has received, and has conveyed those messages to the world has been clearly manifest. That such messages can be received and transmitted is demonstrated to the recipient, at least. Such recipient thereby comes into the consciousness of a being invisible to the material world, a being supreme in intelligence, wisdom, and power. Anyone can receive these messages. Moreover, the fact that man has received such messages which he has interpreted and delivered to the bewildered multitudes is a positive demonstration of the existence of an intelligent creator. The world has never doubted that the voice of inspiration was the voice of divinity. The Christian world has found its coherence in the recognition of the fact that the prophets who delivered their messages to the people received their messages directly from God. But the Christian world has always been persuaded that the voice of inspiration is the isolated tone of a century, not the inheritance possible to a race. Thought transference, in the time of Christ, was called tradition. The scientist, from his viewpoint, discovers that thoughts thus received are perceived on the intuitive side of consciousness and find their full expression in the conscious mind. The unsolved problem is, how can man receive thought? Under every form of worship since the world began, a partial answer to this question has been given. In the channel of industries, under later civilization, another answer is heard. It is evidenced in the fact that the man who trusts himself to a possibility of achievement, to the investment of his own powers to reach that achievement, thereby has given expression to thought received from the source of being. He has moreover demonstrated to the world in that achievement the fact that the initial thought was received from this source, and he has but transmitted it to the world. It is manifest to the student of the theme that thought transference has been so clearly demonstrated that it needs not to be farther pursued as an investigation. Thought transference is defined as any means of conveying thought by word, by action, by the printed page, the telephone, the telegraph, etc. When the recipient has put into operation the suggestion which the message implies, it becomes evident he has received and comprehended the message. Christ's teachings. There are two features of the teachings of Christ which it is well to consider in this relation. The life of Christ was the one perfect life of all centuries. His ministry was that of the teacher to convey to the world the message of the Father, not his own. It fell upon many deaf, untrained ears, but it entered as an abiding sweetness in many souls. That sweetness, that breath of power, diffused itself. That message was repeated by lips sanctified under his touch. The gladsome air bore it upon its soft wings to the darkest recesses of the earth. Here and there, in that darkness, it fell upon some waiting soul. That soul gave it rebirth, and so it became incarnated again and again in the souls of men. When the Christian world sent its missionaries to the lands denominated heathen, they discovered the Christ thought had preceded them. In crude form, to be sure, in accordance with the limited conception of man, but it found expression in Oriental literature. The Buddhist philosophy, in its highest conception, divested of the excrescences of time, holds as its germ thought the altruism of the Christ message. Under the more ancient civilizations of the Chinese Empire, as discovered in the writings of Confucius, amid the literary rubbish of the centuries, the student continually discovers a vein of the Christ thought which even antedated the advent of Christ into the world. Whence came it? Under the voice of prophecy, which was the voice of God, as literally to the Chinese as to the wandering Jews. It is manifest. Under old Egyptian formulas, the archaeologist discovers in the long silent hieroglyphics here and there a clear tone which tells of something higher, something diviner than was expressed in their forms of worship. The Christ thought lingered in that oriental air, and here and there a soul awakened to the mystery of godliness caught these tones and gave them crystallized form. So that, despite the excrescences of material thought which pervaded the minds of men, it found imperishable recognition in the tombs of the buried ages. Under the latest explorations of Egypt, there has been exhumed a monument of the Madonna and the Christ child, a monument whose inscription is that unknown voice of prophecy antedating by thousands of years the advent of Christ. Whence came it? Into some soul of that ancient day came the message of the invisible world of the oncoming Christ. He gave to that message enduring form, out of the imagery of form constructed in his own soul. He left to the world's inheritance this record of the interchange between the divine and the human. Such result was the product of the long, silent, uninterpreted law of telepathy. Christ was the first interpreter of this law. This constituted largely his mission to the race. But the value of a message lies in its recognition. If it fails of value, the trouble is with the receiver. He has not grasped the truth that the message is to his own soul, nor has it been recognized as a message from the infinite. Before a message from the divine or the human can be of value, it must have a period of gestation. When it is given birth, it is an idea, and in that idea lies the constructed form of the distinctive project. Paul, on Mars Hill in the city of ancient Athens, became a world exponent of thought forces. Only a little time before, he was hurrying over the hills of Palestine to the scene of the martyrdom of Stephen, stoned to death for advocating the new faith, the relation of the divine to the human. Saul of Tarsus is interrupted in his journey by a message from this same infinite source which he had despised. "Soul, soul, why persecutest thou me?" Soul recognized the voice, received the message, incorporated it into his own consciousness, and became its advocate. Later, standing upon the rocky summit of Mars Hill in the presence of the Supreme Court of Athens, Paul dares interpret to this august tribunal the message of the one living and true God. The unknown God whose altar stood in the midst of the idolatrous city, in whose pantheon were numbered 30,000 gods. This court held within itself the sentence of death to any man who should introduce a new God. But Paul's defense so moved the court that they too were persuaded he had heard a new voice, and one of the judges of the court himself listened to the voice and became a convert to Christianity. Such is the power of thought received from the infinite mind, constructed and given birth in the mind of men. In the material world, the investigator has demonstrated in the laboratory the great laws that form the fundamental principles of Christ's philosophy. The chemist, with every precipitate of the crucible, demonstrates the possibilities within reach of every man who will light the laboratory fires with his own hands. And he who has the courage to do this is he who has heard the message and dares interpret it first to his own consciousness and then to the world. Telepathy is not struggling in the balance for want of force, but for trained minds to receive impressions. Yet the mind can be taught to receive these impressions without training. The atmosphere is bound together by the very fabric of God's thought. It does not depend upon man's power to think, but upon his power to receive thought. Christ said, "Blessed are the ears that hear." But the ears of universal man are not attuned to hear. They have not been trained to listen. Yet hanging, trembling in every atom of the atmosphere are the messages of the infinite to the finite. Listening to these whisperings, man is able to say, "I can construct a machine that will take up God's own sunbeams and cause them to shed light in the darkest caverns." At this point, science takes up the demonstration and interprets it to the individual and the race. Columbus received his message at the land of the great unknown, away across the western seas, from him in whose lands lay the sea and the land. Columbus constructed that message into an idea. It had come to full consciousness within himself. Under the power of that ripened thought, he was able to stand before the court of Spain and plead his cause, to ask for materials for the execution of his great design. Isabella, by the power of thought-transference, constructed within her own mind a vision of Columbia, the gem of the ocean, and she laid her jewels at his feet. With the crudest methods of navigation, with untraversed seas lying before him, with God's thought as the north star of his journeyings, indifferent to the protests and the mutiny of his own seamen, Columbus demonstrated to the world the unity of forces in the thought atmosphere. Moreover, that those forces find their highest demonstration in scientific test. Marconi, upon the highest plane of scientific demonstration, is illustrating to the world, by the most inexplicable and delicate test, by instrument born of his own thought, which in itself seems as the voice of omnipotence, the hitherto unwritten law of telepathy. He has proven the absolutism of a thought atmosphere, every atom of which responds to the impulse it receives, and with scientific accuracy registers that response in the receiving instrument without visible or material media. The whole scientific world stands silent before these tests, and with almost prophetic instinct ask if the veil of the invisible, of the Holy of Holies of the temple of God, is not about to be rent in twain and all mystery of interchange be revealed. In the dawn of the world's civilization, to Satan's credit, it was believed the inventor received his knowledge from Satan. He who would now affirm that electricity is of the devil is he who would be held irresponsible for any words which might fall from his lips. Truth has its origin in God, and under the demonstrations of science it seems almost a work of supererogation to affirm that thoughts can be received direct from the infinite mind. Professor Elmer Gates of Washington in his laboratory is making a scientific demonstration of the truth of divinity, that all things are of God, that behind all things lies the same unchangeable and unchanging cause. The man who has individualized himself is the man who has trusted himself to give the whisperings of the infinite mind. But the mental world is in need of a receiving instrument, and, as in the physical universe, mind will only record the specific message sent. Indeed, throughout this entire realm, it is found that whatever lies true in the physical universe is also true in the spiritual universe. Man's thought, however, will always go out charged with his own identity if he is continually in touch with the infinite. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2. Telepathic influence of one mind with another. Mental interchange of man with man. Entering this phase of the discussion, telepathy may be defined as the influence of one mind with another, or the individual recognition of the thoughts of other minds. It is common to speak of man as having a twofold nature. It has been attempted by the religious teacher as well as the novelist to prove every human character embodies the two personalities, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. But to affirm that man has by inheritance somewhat of evil and somewhat of good is wholly at variance with the affirmation of Scripture that man is made in the likeness and image of God. In that heritage of the likeness of God is discovered man's inherent freedom. Otherwise, he could by no means have proceeded from the hand of him who himself is freedom. Man, therefore, having his inheritance thus, must be free, free to choose his own abiding place in the universe of thought, free to admit into the castle which his own hands have constructed the forces essential to the execution of his life purposes. It is one of the oft expressed tenets of my philosophy that the mind does not hold thought, that thought itself enters the domain of mind, and once admitted, becomes a controlling influence, shaped only by our beliefs. Beliefs acts upon the mental concept as the hand of the potter upon the clay. Man is endowed with unlimited power and wisdom measured by his belief. The soul of man has infinite room in which to work, limited only by his unbelief. It is necessary to keep this closely under consideration in order to comprehend the definitions which follow. At the inception of man's life, we find him endowed with power to attract to himself whatever is requisite, either mentally or physically, to the fullness of his entire nature. This power of attraction may be designated the psychic force or passion of man's being. The first manifestation of this force is seen in the passion of hunger expressed by the infant. The babe, by its own instinct, attracts to itself the elements which are requisite to the evolution of the body and the continuance of the bodily functions. Until that first cry of hunger is heard, life is a sealed book. No man can fathom the power of the child mind. No chemist can discover by what alchemy of thought the babe takes on consciousness of the world into which it has so strangely come. This unexpressed mind of the child we denominate as the unconscious mind. When the unconscious mind transcribes its unwritten messages to the conscious mind, or in other words, passes them through the avenues of the senses to the conscious mind, that section of the unconscious becomes the conscious. Hence, we have the two terms, the conscious and the unconscious, in order to distinguish between what man has accomplished and what he may accomplish, between what he has achieved and what is yet possible of achievement, between what he knows and what he has yet to learn. Thus, all the undeveloped forces of the human mind we designate as the unconscious self. It is this unconscious self which is possessed of all the attributes of him of whom it is the image and likeness. If, then, man is endowed with the divine image and likeness, and we recognize in the Creator the attributes of omnipotence, omniscience, and omnipresence, then the power of the mind thus related is unlimited. That part of man's mentality, therefore, which has come into consciousness, we denominate the conscious mind, and the unconscious self is in a constant process of evolution. It was the evident intention of the Creator that man should, as a finality of life, have evolved all there is within him. However, under this continuous evolution, restrictive influences have hindered its expression. There is one statement of Jesus which, divested of fanatical interpretation, indicates that Christ knew the undeveloped powers of the mind when he said, "To him that believeth, all things are possible." The measure of man's possibilities is always in accordance with that which he assumes as possible to himself. His limitations are fixed only by his unbelief. This message of Christ has often found expression in the minds of men who never heard the name of Jesus. It has found expression in every man who has given the world an invention. Wherefore, whenever man has accomplished that of which the world has no previous record, that man has received the vibrant message in his own mental atmosphere, constructed it into form with the silent chamber of his own mentality, and then given it expression through his achievement. In the realm of religious teaching, the minister of the gospel, in the analysis of the message, "To him that believeth all things are possible," has always added, with more grace than wisdom, "My brethren, all things are possible with God." The significance of the message is interpreted by science, was never advocated in the pulpit. Christ, in all his philosophy, never announced God's possibilities. It was unnecessary. That truth is an axiom weakened by analysis. The world had recognized the range of God's possibilities. Man had not doubted that God, who created the universe and sustained it, had power to preserve it through the cycles of eternity. Hence, it was the sole purpose of Christ to indicate to man his own possibilities. Yet there are few men, if any, who ever stood by the altars of the church and announced to the audience as the central thought, not only in the religious world, but in the universe of material things, that to him that believeth, all things are possible. Another tenet of my philosophy of telepathy is that thoughts are entities, realities. Thoughts are the children of the mind. They come into life with the identities, the personalities of their authors. But once given birth, they know no death. Dropping the similes, from the hour of its going forth, thought continues to vibrate through the whole omnipresent space of God's universe. The world today can hear thoughts and translate them as readily as could Moses translate the message of Mount Sinai, or Isaiah, the angel's song that announced the birth of the babe of Bethlehem. How shall the mind of man receive thought vibrations? The first definite instruction was given by Isaiah when he said, "Be still and know that I am God. Be still and listen, and then translate the message as you receive it from the comprehension of other listeners. That this can be done has been amply demonstrated in the investigations of hypnotism and clairvoyance. In the meetings of early Quakers, distinctive evidence has been given of the truth of my postulate. An entire audience will sit in silence, no one disturbed by the silence. Each one, in the quietude of his own soul, is listening for some message from the inner that he may express to the outer world. As soon as the message becomes distinct to the inner consciousness, the recipient trusts himself to express it. The audience receives it, then, with that directness and force which carries with it the sense that it is the divine utterance. The Methodist camp meeting also furnishes abundant proof of this truth. Attention of a large number of people is concentrated upon a given subject, which is under analysis by the speaker. Presently, some listener, more receptive than another, hears the whisper of the unknown and breaks out with impulsive declaration of the same. Then another and another takes it up until the entire audience becomes receptive to the same truth and perhaps breaks forth as one voice in the declaration of the message. Worship is the expression of human recognition, but they who stand outside the circle of receptivity, not hearing the message, look on with surprise and perchance criticism, wholly unconscious of the breath of infinite power. Not less, however, is the same truth illustrated under less distinct conditions. The schoolroom furnishes many vivid illustrations, but infrequently the teacher fails to recognize the source of inspirations of the pupil, and so benumbs the ardor and suppresses the expression of slumbering genius. Harriet Hosmer, the most noted of American sculptors, was the torment of the teachers of her youth because she came in from the recreations of the school with beetles or bugs or snakes or toads, which she brought from the fields to serve as subjects of the sketches she drew with pencil and paper, when the teacher would have her thought directed to the multiplication table or the rules of grammar. But Harriet Hosmer was listening to the voice of prophecy, to which some day, when it should be transcribed in marble, the whole world should listen. Harriet Hosmer startled the Roman world, the art world of her decade, with the products of her chisel. But in her studio at Rome, she was only translating the message rudely expressed with a penknife or pencil in the country schoolhouse in Massachusetts. Rosa Bonheur, the great French artist, in her girlhood shocked the proprieties of Parisian society by her escapades in the Pyrenees among the shepherds, her freedom in the stockyards, and the semi-masculine attire essential to these adventures. Yet today, in all the world of art, there is no more strikingly original canvas, or one which has attracted more universal recognition than her Horse Fair. An art critic, gazing upon Miss Bonheur's canvas, which represented a flock of sheep in the Pyrenees, was asked by another critic, "What do you think of it?" He replied, "I think I can feel the wool." Rosa Bonheur, fully persuaded of the distinctive message she had received, counted no effort, no isolation, no criticism so severe as to impede for a single moment the translation of her own divine message to the world. Such illustrations could be multiplied indefinitely, and many a schoolboy and schoolgirl of this day is listening to some inner voice and trying to catch its vibrations, while the obtuse teacher or parent is making assiduous effort to divert that expression. In the city of Chicago, a few years since, a lady of wealth and rank, 3 of whose children had graduated at Northwestern University, said to the writer, "What do you think of my son, who, with all the facilities of this university at his disposal, chooses to go into Chicago every morning and put on a leather apron and work in the dust of oil of a machine shop, to the immense mortification of his parents?" I replied, "I glory in your son. He is transcribing some unwritten message of his own soul, and some day you will reverse your judgment." Today, that young man, still with life almost at its inception, is not unknown in the great world of mechanics. End of chapter 2. Telepathy and Thought-Transference by Professor S.A. Weltmer. Chapter 3. Receptivity to Thought. The Sender and the Recipient. Telepathy has been regarded either as that abstruse subject which is incomprehensible to the ordinary thinker, or it is that charmed thing which a chosen few may gather and wear as an amulet about the neck, which shall bring to the possessor whatever is desired. The charm of telepathy lies in the fact that a message awaits whomsoever will listen, but that message may lie dormant within the soul and be valueless both to the recipient and to the world. To be of value, the message must be constructed into form, expressed in words, grace the pages of literature, expressed upon the canvas, or in any one of the thousand simpler arts of life. These messages are not less distinct to those who stand upon the lower than to those upon the higher planes of life, but in his fidelity to the message in whatever avenue lies opportunity for achievement. An artisan applied to Napoleon for a situation. The mighty general asked of him, "What can you do, my man?" He replied, "Sir, I can make the best shoe pegs in France." It is needless to add that Napoleon gave him the opportunity he sought. The history of human life indicates that in occupations termed menial by those who do not comprehend, the same law of success obtains. There is a divinity in whatsoever life expresses to the full its own secret of power. But the evolution of power, the working out of that problem, is not the idle purpose of a day. It is wrought out in the tense muscles of the forger of the anvil, who can shoe a horse so that he may bear in safety upon a most uncertain path the freightage of human life committed to his care. It has a marked and definite expression in the life of the switchman, in all our great railroad centers. There is a rushing hither and thither of trains freighted with human lives. Destinies lie in the safety of those trains. Men, perchance, with but slight recognition in the world of letters, of science, or of art, hold in their hands the destinies of the scientists, the artist, the man of letters, who is speeding away on some urgent mission. These men at the switchboards, the men at the signal stations, hearing within their own soul the whisper of the infinite, realizing the magnitude of the purpose involved, true to the voice within them, transcribe it to the world in the silent, unspoken message of safety to the thousands committed to their care. The engineer, who stands with hand on the throttle, guiding his trains through the darkness of the night, up the difficult mountain passes, along the brink of the chasms, through the haze of the darksome tunnels, is listening to the voice within him, so that divinest utterance of all Christian philanthropy, the spirit of all statutes, human and divine, which have in them blessings to humanity. Do unto others as you would that they should do unto you. And to him the voice of duty is the voice of God. And so the engine sings its song, and the stars keep sentinel watch about the man thus clothed within divinity. And the traveler sleeps in his Pullman car with a little unrest as in the silence of his own chamber. Returning for a moment to the province of art, a gentleman asked me what I considered the highest conception of art. I replied, "The highest conception of art is the ability to paint a picture so clearly that the person looking at it can comprehend the thought of the artist and make it his own. The great artist is he who can so interpret his own message to men that it shall be understood." The artist may toil for years with his paint and brush and express only in dim outlines his own conception, but suddenly the inspiration has mastery of him, and he dashes his brush across the canvas with a subtle force which makes him immortal. That recognition is not found perchance in the harmonious blending of color or in the design upon the canvas. At some unexpected hour, a man stands before this canvas. He has never made a stroke with the brush. He has never drawn an angle. He does not know what perspective signifies, but the picture fascinates him. Upon that canvas, he sees the ideals of his life illustrated. He sees to the artist, "You have painted my ideals. You have expressed the unexpressed thought of my life. I will purchase your picture at whatsoever cost." The artist disposes of the picture at an extravagant sum. He has become famous. The purchaser would not in all his life be divorced from the canvas because it has expressed the ideal of his life thought. That canvas speaks to him day by day. The message of the artist is transcribed into his own consciousness. He makes it his own. He goes out with a new force in his life. He gathers to himself other forces, and he in turn expresses to the world the divinity of his own thought, and so the process of thought evolution extends itself into every avenue of life. In this illustration, the unity of thought between the artist and the purchaser is telepathy. The question is asked, how are these thoughts transferred? How does the mind take hold upon the thoughts vibrant in the mental atmosphere? By mental atmosphere, I mean that all space is mental atmosphere and original vibrations from the divine mind fill this space. To illustrate, a lad not yet 11 years of age being placed in a receptive attitude was sent on a mental search to discover a missing letter that had been sent from France to America. It was a letter of much commercial significance, and its immediate recovery was a matter of much moment. In a little time he had returned from his mental wanderings. He had traced the letter to a post office within a small town. It had come in on a late train after the postmaster had left the office. An assistant had been left in charge of the office. He noted it was a registered letter. To ensure its safety during the night, he slipped it beneath a package of papers where it was overlooked. The French lady to whom the letter was addressed had left the town, and no call for the letter was made until the place of its depository was forgotten. I asked my subject, "How were you able to trace that letter?" He replied, "I put every thought out of my mind except the thought of that letter. I trusted myself to trace it, and in a few moments my mind perceived its hiding place." Telepathy is a mental process operated by laws belonging to the unconscious mind of man, and governed by laws known only to that unconscious mind. I have been witness of similar cases since that time, but that experience furnished me the key to the investigation of the subject. I asked the boy how he was able to stop thinking. It has been often said by experimenters, "I try to stop thinking, but I just keep on." The boy explained it thus: "The thoughts which you recognize when not exercising an intention to think are not your thoughts, but whatever thoughts you are willing shall vibrate upon your own brain and cause you to act, vibrate at your own volition." Thoughts have a recurrent tendency. Samuel Smiley, in one of his metaphysical talks to young men, makes a statement which is liable to be misleading, but I will use it for argument's sake. He says, when a person has once performed an act, there is a tendency in the mind to repeat the act. This is not true in all cases. Thoughts sent forth from the mind may return and knock for admission, but we may exclude them if we will. A light rubber ball projected against a wall will return to the sender if he is in a position to receive it. To illustrate, under the impulse of a sudden passion, a man may commit a grievous deed. As soon as he returns to the normal, he is conscious of the deepest remorse. There is no tendency to re-perform the act, but brick walls cannot shut from him the conscious remorse of the act. Such are the thoughts that rebound and ask for readmission. It is the reflex action of mind. In the discussion of telepathy and thought-transference, the scientist does not assume to have discovered anything new. Nothing new can be discovered. Truth is a part of omniscience, a part of the eternal Creator Himself. Hence, it is as old or new as God is. The thought of personal, individual freedom that had been smothered by the rites and ceremonies of ritualistic Christianity for years found its first interpreter in Luther. It was a magnetic thought that had long been vibrant in the electric atmosphere, which found expression in the laboratory of Edison. The receptivity of thought in this manner can be illustrated in every avenue of life. The first direct message which I recall having heard announced by him who received it, that was of positive character, was given at a Baptist meeting where revival services were held. This church holds the doctrine dear to them, that whoever becomes a minister of the Missionary Baptist Church must do so in response to a personal call from God to enter the ministry. On the night in question, a young man was converted. He was well known in the community as a sower of wild oats. He knew every apple orchard, every melon patch in the adjacent country. On Halloween night, he was the ringleader in all mischief. At this meeting, under the impulse of a sudden conversion, the young man arose without any mental preparation whatever, except possibly what may have been interjected at prayer, for he came of a family of ministers, and stated that he wished to offer himself to the church as a missionary. The young man thus trusted himself to give expression to the promptings of the Spirit. This illustrates one distinctive phase of telepathy, the interchange of thought between the human and the divine. Christ first enunciated to man the truth that words tremble in the atmosphere of thought and are available to him on summons. He said, "When you are taken before magistrates, take no thought what you shall say, for in that hour it shall be given you what you shall say." Your experience is your knowledge. The incidents of your life are your preparation for the answer of any questions that can be propounded to you. Trust the power within you, and at the appointed time, you shall find it adequate to your need. Every extemporaneous speaker, trusting his intuitive impulse in any emergency to express the requisite thought, is by that very act putting himself in the only mental attitude in which the mind can receive thought. He simply excludes from his mind thought on every other line. The difference between the artist who learns to paint at first trial and the one who devotes years to art study is not so much a difference in the amount of work done as a difference in the way he trusts himself. Whoever learns to rely upon himself or herself relies upon more than he or she thinks. The man who adheres to his own experience in statements is certain to speak the truth and to be understood by his hearers. The experience of one man justifies the truth of the statement of the experience of another man. The man who trusts himself to comprehend the thoughts that enter his mind is trusting a higher power than he thinks. It has been a fault in our present system of education that power lies largely in inheritance. If one's ancestors have been men of note, by virtue of that inheritance he attempts to construct his own possibilities. Paul said, "Let him that thinketh he stands take heed lest he fall." Ancestry is an unstable footing. All power lies with God. No man has inherent power, and it is only through God that power becomes manifest. If this life that animates my body is my own, why can I not stay here 1,000,000 years if I desire? Simply because the power that sustained me is not my power. Why is it that without any knowledge on my part, I find myself endowed with the ability to know all things? Because God has given to man to know all things. But man can only know things consciously as he learns them through the avenues of the senses. Men's power is ever delegated power. The power that responds when I raise my hand is the power that made me and sustained me. It is delegated to me from my Creator. My duty lies in its expression. When man finds this power, he finds God. When man trusts himself, he need not say, "I cannot do this." Man, however, puts himself in the attitude of Moses, who, being directed by the voice in the burning bush to lead his people out of bondage, sought to evade his duty. He made apology to the Lord for his slowness of speech, as though the Lord were not conscious of the capacity of him whom he had chosen. When Moses finally determined to deliver his message, he found himself compassed about with power. He felt himself environed in an atmosphere in which unbelief or doubt could not linger. This was the experience of Job, when his wife and friends, seeking to persuade him he was forgotten of God, bade him curse God and die. But Job was able to say, "I know that my Redeemer liveth." Once possessed of this knowledge, each step leads into a higher consciousness, for memory never gives up its possessions. It is said by some, "I receive messages, and if I just knew how to tell them, they might be of some benefit to others as well as myself." There is but one answer: trust. Confidence will be established with the first trial, and after a time, man will learn what it means that God and one are a majority. After the accumulation of power by such processes, man becomes conscious of the unused forces of the universe and that they are subservient to him. There is but one path to this knowledge. It must be learned, just as the student learns to solve a problem in mathematics by solving it, just as the lawyer learns to plead by pleading his case before the court. Telepathy, then, in its highest manifestation, is that power by which people receive out of the infinite space the thought vibrations of the ages and trust themselves to express the messages received. A mastery of this process carries with it the power to solve the whole problem of life. Telepathy is not a completed science, but he who trusts himself to give expression to the thoughts that ask for expression has taken the first step in acquiring this science. Hundreds of men have died unknown and unnoted who might have left the record of glorious doing had it not been for their own mistrust. They did not conceive of the fact that by refusing to trust themselves, they were refusing to trust God. The result of such mistrust upon human life is summed up in the epitaph of Gray's Elegy, written in the English Church burial of Stoke Poges, under the shadow of the cypress which moaned above the grave of one who just misinterpreted the full mission of his own life. Quote, the epitaph. Here rests his head upon the lap of earth, a youth to fortune and to fame unknown. Fair science frowned not on his humble birth, and melancholy marked him for her own. Large was his bounty, and his soul sincere. Heaven did a recompense as largely send. He gave to misery all he had, a tear. He gained from heaven, 'twas all he wished, a friend. No farther seek his merits to disclose, or draw his frailties from their dread abode. There they alike in trembling hope repose, the bosom of his Father and his God. When man comprehends all that is understood by telepathy, he will understand the whole scope of the Christian philosophy. End of chapter. Meet me at the next video where we continue with this book titled Telepathy and Thought-Transference by Professor Weltmer. In the next coming chapters, he's going to cover the sender and the recipient, the idea of that receptivity to thought, and trusting one's intuitive impulses. He will also cover the philosophy of absent treatment and so much more. Please do, if you haven't done so, hit like, share, and subscribe.